To me, the development context of Spellcasters Chronicles conveys a very clear sense of a turning point for Quantic Dream. A studio known for narrative-driven single-player experiences now trying to prove it can sustain a continuous, free-to-play, competitive game with longevity. This alone puts the project in a delicate spot. It is ambitious, but it is also the kind of bet that only pays off if the foundation of the game is rock solid, and if the team knows how to react quickly to what the community points out. I feel they're trying to sell this blend of third-person action with a strategic deck-building layer as the game's DNA. The promise is fast-paced 3v3 matches, with objective capture and destruction of the enemy core, the lifestones, and mobility that is quite outside the genre standard, featuring free flight for repositioning and space control. In practice, this sounds to me like we want you to play with a strategic mind, but with the racing heart of an action game. As someone who only had contact with the beta, my feeling is that Quantic Dream is in a phase of finding its own rhythm for live development. And this shows in how they talk about shaping the game with feedback. They themselves harp on the fact that entering a new genre was challenging, and that the idea is to adjust the path along with the players, which is great. But it is also a warning that a lot is still being formed and could change significantly. I see this as courage, but also as an identity risk. If they try to please everyone, the game might lose its personality. The beta, from what I felt playing, seems very focused on this arena core loop. Get in, fight for territories and objectives, make the composition work, and try to close out the game with coordination. And it makes sense because the studio itself says it is starting the beta phase with the central loop focused on arena battles, leaving community narrative and the macro loop for later. Personally, I like this structural honesty. Better to nail the combat and match readability first than to promise a social open world and deliver a shaky PvP. Where I get most curious and a bit suspicious is this discourse of community-driven narrative applied to a competitive game. Quantic Dream has the history and creative ego to try something different here, and they explicitly position this as part of the plan, bringing narrative expertise to a multiplayer in a singular way. But competitive multiplayer is cruel. If the story gets in the way of the rhythm, it becomes noise. If it's just cosmetic, it becomes marketing. The point is, for me, this will only work if the narrative is tied to seasons, collective choices with clear consequences, and rewards that don't break the balancing. Another interesting signal of the development context is the emphasis on content iteration and performance between betas. The official material for Closed Beta 2 speaks of major updates, including a new arena, Nordic Shore, and additions of spells and creatures. And the dev update mentions a focus on optimization, new features, and even a ranked beta mode. As a player, I read this as they are trying to speed up the test, learn, fix cycle, and this is almost mandatory in a free-to-play game that wants to hook people for months. My opinion after the beta is that Spellcasters Chronicles is being built with a very specific ambition: to be a PvP that mixes creativity, building a spellbook, readability, well-defined mage roles, and spectacle, large summons, titans, verticality. I hope they don't pasteurize this proposal by trying to imitate established models, because what caught my attention was precisely the potential for a magical arena that is looser and more inventive than normal. If Quantic Dream really maintains this stance of listening to feedback and adjusting quickly, something special could come out of this. If the live service swallows the design and it becomes just a grind and a suffocating meta, then it becomes just another pretty competitive game. The story, as presented so far, gives me the vibe of a fantasy that is mythological and political at the same time. The gods have vanished, an ancient power called Source remains, and now a select group of mages, the Spellcasters, is literally fighting over who will command the fate of the world. This starting point is simple, but I like it because it fits very well with a competitive game. Everyone has a clear reason to enter the arena and fight. However, playing the beta, my sensation is that the story is still more in the air than on the ground. You perceive the world through the tone, the names, and the concept of the tapestry of fate. But it's not the kind of game that grabs you by the collar and says, come here, let me tell you a whole chapter right now. And I don't say this as automatic criticism. I just think that, for now, the game is asking you to buy into the idea of the universe before delivering a more bodied narrative. What I find most interesting is the promise of a narrative guided by the community and by seasons, because this could become the hook that finally makes the story matter in the player's day-to-day. The official description itself states that every season, the community will face a choice that impacts gameplay and lore. And this is the kind of thing that can transform a patch into an event and the meta into a consequence of the world. In my head, if this is executed well, you can create that nice feeling of I was there when the world changed. At the same time, I remain cautious because community history is a beautiful and dangerous phrase. If the choice is just a vote with 2 options and a short text afterward, it becomes decoration. If it's something that changes mechanics, maps, factions, or even seasonal rules, then I buy the drama. And since Quantic Dream placed this idea as part of the game's identity, I feel they will be held accountable for delivering something more than flavor text. Another thing that caught my attention was the figure of the chronicler, Ozdem Divam, as a narrator within the universe, kind of bridging the gap between the players and the world. I think this is a smart move, because you can use this character as an official voice without breaking immersion, and even transform an update into a chapter, literally a guy recording what the community did. GameSpot describes him exactly in this vein of intermediary and in-world narrator. And this to me is the first concrete sign of how narrative can appear in a PvP game without becoming a long cutscene. My more personal opinion, the scenario, the gods are gone, the source remains, and now everyone wants to control the power, looks like the perfect foundation for rivalry, faction, propaganda, and arena legends. I want to see the game make me feel that my spellcaster isn't just climbing ranks, but leaving a real mark on the tapestry, even if it's through small things, like global events, weather changes on maps, or new rules justified by source effects. Because when the story marries the system, the competitive aspect gains a soul. I would say that Spellcasters Chronicles has its story in promise with good signs mode. The prologue of the world, gods, source, fate, is strong, and the idea of seasons with choices is very catchy. But I still hope to see more history happening, and less history as a slogan. If they manage to use the chronicler and these seasonal choices to tie balancing changes, content, and maps into a continuous arc, then it will be the kind of lore that people discuss between matches, not just in the menu. The gameplay, as I felt it in the beta, is a cerebral MOBA with the camera and feel of an action game. You aren't just clicking on a map and rotating, you are piloting a mage in third person, flying, aiming, and making quick decisions while thinking about the macro. The developer makes this very clear in the proposal. 3 versus 3, focused on cooperation, with a mix of action and strategy. What got me the most is the verticality and flight as the language of the game. It's not just mobility to look pretty. It changes how you fight for space, how you escape, how you initiate, and how you contest objectives. And the arenas are designed for this up and down movement, and for different sightlines. In the beta, I felt that whoever masters this movement gains seconds that are worth gold. And this quickly separates the player who shoots magic from the player who really plays the map. The strategic part appears in territory control via altars and lane pushing with summons. The basics released by the team explain that capturing source altars gives you advance points to summon creatures closer to the enemy, lifestone, and this gives real weight to objectives beyond just trading damage in the middle of the map. In practice, I thought it was cool, because the game punishes you if you just want to brawl. If you don't convert advantage into map control, the game stalls and becomes a war of attrition. The spice that differentiates it is the deck building of spells and summons, which changes the reading of each match. Quantic Dream talks about building a playstyle by equipping spells and an arsenal that exceeds 50 options between schools of magic, which suggests a very high ceiling for variety if the balancing keeps up. In the beta, the sensation is that you are always trying to build an identity. It's not just choosing a character, it's choosing the toolkit that will define your windows of power. And that's where the Titans come in, which for me are the game just got serious moment. The Know the Basics page says they are decisive creatures that you can only summon when you fill the Titan gauge by dealing and taking damage, which creates a very clear rhythm of escalation and timing. I like this type of mechanic because it forces a decision. Save it for defense, use it to break an advantage, or pull it to finish before the other team can breathe. The graphics of Spellcasters Chronicles, to me, are that type of stylized fantasy with a AAA look, more concerned with delivering combat readability and visual impact than chasing hyper-realism. What Quantic Dream shows and describes officially reinforces this idea of well-marked arenas, flashy magic, and a very polished presentation for a third-person competitive game. Playing the beta, I felt that the high point is in the spell effects and the summons. There is weight, there is shine, there is scale, and this sells the fantasy of being an arcane commander, unleashing chaos on the field well. At the same time, this is exactly the place where the game flirts with the danger of becoming visual clutter, because in 3v3, everything happens close together and fast, and a poorly calibrated effect can hide what really matters: hitbox, projectile, danger zone. The direction itself seems to know this, since the game's official communication insists a lot on clarity and tactical combat in the arena. The arenas, from what I saw and played, have a strong visual identity and a use of geometry that matches the flight mechanics. A very clear example is Nordic Shore, which the developer presents as a frozen, harsh, and very open coastline, where positioning and awareness become even more important, and this speaks to the visuals. More sightlines, more breathing room in the scenery, fewer tiny things fighting with the VFX. I like it when the map isn't just pretty, but teaches how the match should be played. A detail that marked me in this Nordic Shore is the tone. It gives the sensation of a place battered by ancient wars, and the official description itself pulls this atmosphere of ruin and regional myth. Even without me playing for the story, the setting helps create personality and makes the arena seem like a real place, not just a neutral board. In competitive games, this is rare. Usually, a map is functional and that's it. Here, you can see an attempt at world building. Visually, Spellcasters Chronicles looks like a game that wants to convince you through the spectacle of magic and arena design. And for the most part, it succeeds. My request is that they continue refining the clarity of effects in chaotic situations, because the charm of the game lies in you understanding what is happening even when the sky is full of spells. If they maintain this discipline of performance and readability while expanding content, it's possible to have a competitive game that is beautiful and, more importantly, comfortable to play. The performance of Spellcasters Chronicles in the beta, to me, has that classic look of an ambitious game that is still learning to breathe on PC. When it's smooth, the combat feels delicious and responsive. When it chokes, you feel it instantly because it's a fast PvP with a lot happening. And the most important thing is that you can see the developer treated performance as a real priority between Beta 1 and Beta 2. The biggest sign of this is that they didn't just talk about optimization. They put numbers in the closed Beta 2 patch notes. 20% improvement in CPU performance, 23% in memory usage, and 10% in GPU memory usage. I like when a studio does this because it takes the conversation from trust us and puts it into we tweaked here, here, and here, even if the final result varies from machine to machine. For a game full of spells, large creatures, and on-screen effects, this type of adjustment is literally what separates fun from frustration. Another thing I consider quite relevant: the shift in focus regarding requirements. On the beta site, they explained that after feedback from beta 1, they revised performance to improve the experience and welcome new players, and pinned 16 gigabytes of RAM as a requirement minimum and recommended, with a quick spec check upon launching. This, in my reading, is the studio recognizing that asking for above average hardware in an initial phase kills the testing base, and without a testing base, the game doesn't mature. That said, I still see a consistency challenge. It's not enough for the game to run okay on average. In a 3v3 arena, what hurts is the small stutter at the wrong second, right when dodging, ulting, or finishing an objective. And since they are still in beta, I view these microstutters as part of the package, but also as the first thing I would demand before talking about serious competitive play. Especially since they themselves are adding ranked in beta 2, and ranked without stability becomes free stress. A part of performance that interests me a lot and that people sometimes ignore is the relationship between VFX and readability. In a game with so much magic and summoning, if the team needs to reduce or re-optimize effects to hold the frame rate, this might actually help clarity, but it can also kill the impact if done poorly. The patch notes indicate they're working on several fronts at the same time: content, balance, QOL, and performance. So I remain curious to see how they will balance spectacle and stability. It is also worth noting that the developer is very direct in saying that having a key does not guarantee access if the PC doesn't meet the requirements. This is a very pragmatic way to avoid the test becoming a festival of complaints from machines off target, but at the same time, it reinforces that the game still has a relatively demanding profile. In other words, improving, yes, but it is not yet that free-to-play that runs on anything. I see a correct path because they listened to feedback and brought optimization with numbers and requirement adjustments, which is a sign of technical maturity. But I still wouldn't put my competitive faith 100% in this until I feel that the most chaotic fights remain consistently stable, without hitches and without sharp drops when the game gets spectacular. If they maintain this pace of iteration and don't let performance become a chronic seasonal problem, then the game has a chance to hold a community for a long time. It is worth playing Spellcasters Chronicles if you are in the mood for a different 3v3 PvP, with more character piloting in third person and less of that traditional top-down view. And if you enjoy the idea of creating your style through the spellbook instead of just copying a ready-made build. From what Quantic Dream itself releases, the game wants to reward strategy, skill, and creativity in a free-to-play format, and this matches well with what I felt in the beta. For me, the biggest reason to test it is precisely the mixture. You fly, aim, fight for space, but at the same time decide the composition of spells and summons, and this gives it a very distinct flavor. The press release describes this proposal as a blend of third-person action with strategic decision-making, with fast 3v3 matches and arenas with verticality. I played it and thought, okay, this has a spice that isn't just a MOBA skin. Now, regarding who the game is for, I would place 3 very clear profiles. First, those who already like MOBA and arena games and want a more compact and intense format, 3v3, with the objective of destroying the lifestone and territory control via altars. Second, those who enjoy deck building and building kits, because the game highlights more than 50 spells and summons and pushes you to experiment with combinations. Third, those who like gameplay with mobility and positioning, because flight and verticality greatly change the reading of the fight and map, and for whom I think it is not so indicated, at least for now. Those who hate relying on a team, because the marketing itself harps on cooperation as everything, and 3v3 amplifies errors and lack of communication. It is also not the best fit for those who want a traditional story mode right now, because the proposal is for an evolving narrative through seasons and community choices, something more live than a closed campaign. And if the person has a modest PC, I would already warn that the beta was quite demanding in requirements. Speaking of which, performance weighs on the recommendation. The developer made it explicit on the beta page that even with a key, you might be left out if the PC doesn't meet the requirements, and set 16 gigabytes of RAM as the baseline with GPU at a minimum level of RTX 2070 or RX 5708 gigabytes VRAM. I think it's great that they are transparent, but it's also a real filter. It is free to play, but is not free to run on just any machine. I think I will play at launch, yes, but with a very clear mental condition of showing up to see how the stability and balancing are on day one. What excites me is seeing that they already tested a ranked mode in beta and spoke openly that they are optimizing and adding support systems, which indicates that the game wants to have a competitive base and a healthy community. If the launch comes with a stable server and consistent performance, I see myself staying for at least the first few seasons. If I had to nail down a very honest answer, it is worth playing if you want a magical, competitive game with identity and like learning systems, experimenting with decks, and coordinating as a team. I would recommend Test Without Fear to those who have a PC within the requirements and enjoy tactical arenas. And I would recommend Wait a Bit to those who are sensitive to performance issues and want to enter only when the game is more polished. And I, personally, am inclined to play at launch because the beta has already shown a fun core, and what has been disclosed indicates that they are building the layers missing to hold the game for longer.